The Miami Dolphins assistant coaches spoke with the South Florida media yesterday, and I think I got some things to say about the things that they had to say here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, the author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and an NFL analyst for the A to Z Sports NFL Network. Really excited to dig into some coaching quotes here today on the show. We heard from Anthony Weaver and Austin Clark and Frank Smith and Jon Embree and Craig Aukerman and a whole laundry. Bobby Slowick talked. There's a whole laundry list. Joe Barry. Some great stuff from all those coaches. The Dolphins put a lot of those media availabilities, not all of them, but a lot of those media availabilities up on their YouTube channel if you want to kind of get caught up with all of the things that these coaches were asked and had to say. But today on the show, I had a couple of guys that really had me ready to run through some brick walls as it pertains to Anthony Weaver and Austin Clark. I thought there were some interesting quotes about personnel on the offensive side of the ball with Frank Smith and Jon Embree, specifically his focus on Jonnu Smith. And then Craig Aukerman, obviously the new coordinator as the special teams coordinator. So we're going to get into all three phases of the game of football here today. But I want to start with the defensive side of the ball because obviously so much of this Dolphins draft class, the centerpieces of it are the interior defensive linemen. The Dolphins drafted 3, right? And Anthony Weaver talking about the potential of these guys and how their demeanor and their approach and their maturity, despite Jordan Phillips is 20 years old, Kenneth Grant's 21. They're young football players. But that's one of the central themes when you pick up on listening to all these coaches talk, and you can kind of glean some of the things that the team has internally talked a lot about and feels like is important for this year's group, kind of their individual process and buy-in and getting all the guys rowing in the same direction. You could tell that that's something that they have spent some offline time talking to one another about and focused on finding the right kinds of human beings to try to execute that vision within the team. So I want to start with a quote that Anthony Weaver had about the 3 draft picks on the interior defensive line and then piggyback that into something that Austin Clark talked about with this group. I believe the question came from Omar Kelly, so credit where credit's due to Omar for asking this question, asking about what they thought they achieved in the draft process with the trenches. And Weaver said, really excited about Kenneth Grant, what he brings to the middle of the defense, him being here, having the opportunity to work with Benito and Zach Sealer and Austin Clark. Whatever he's supposed to be at the end of the day, I promise you he will reach every bit of that God-given potential. Really happy about Jordan Phillips, guy who was under the radar a little bit. By the way he plays on film and just the person as he is, it's the same thing. He's going to reach that ceiling. I have really high hopes for both kids. And then I don't know how he got Zeke Biggers in the 7th round. The guy has size, length, mass to play as hard as he does. Could end up being a steal for us. But one thing I do know is they're going to click faster. I know we'll live through some growing pains, as you do with all rookies. But one thing I do know is that it's going to click faster for them because of the work that they put in. Again, that last little bit is kind of the central theme of you listen to, whether it's the tight ends coach or the wide receivers coach or the defensive coordinator or the defensive line coach or whoever it is. There's kind of been a central theme with work. Like work, how they work, what's their frame of mind, how do they prep? And I know when you draft guys that are, I think Jordan Phillips is the smallest one and he's 320 pounds, right? Like people see size and correlate size to playing further in the interior and not necessarily having disruptive nature. And Austin Clark was asked about drafting 3 guys that were 3 nose tackles at the college level. And Austin Clark, I really liked his answer, like really got me juiced because that's been one of the things that I've been trying to champion personally for Kenneth Grant is Austin Clark said, you may see them as nose tackles, but we see them as versatile pieces, right? And it's a matter of them getting in here and us finding out what they're capable of and what their role is and what their opportunity is it's going to be what they make it. But he went down a big rabbit hole talking about sometimes like a defensive scheme isn't tailored to the strengths of a player. So you kind of get typecast based off the coaches that you had. Or otherwise, maybe they don't have other complementary players to play that kind of role within their depth chart at the college level. So you just end up doing it, even though it's not necessarily where you're best suited to play. And I think that's especially feels true for Jordan Phillips, who played closer to 50% of his snaps, in the A gaps as compared to Kenneth Grant played 70-something percent of his snaps in the B gap, right? But people see the size and they still want to correlate those guys to just being A gap defenders at the NFL level. But you see some of the run disruption quickness with Jordan Phillips, and I believe it was Austin Clark referenced that explicitly and said he hasn't played a lot of the techniques that we think he's capable of playing and that we're going to ask our guys to play. And we want to see how, especially in this workout period and OTAs, you get a chance to really hone in phase 1 and phase 2 on the techniques and the fundamentals and how to do the things. And we're seeing getting our hands on these guys, asking them with the focus on what kinds of techniques do we want you to play, not necessarily where are you going to play. And it kind of changes the game as far as the projection of the players, because I see a lot of mobility, less so with Zeke Biggers, who I think is a little bit more of your traditional nose. I just think there's opportunities for him to leverage a little bit more consistently and get a little bit more weight room stronger. So I don't know what the pathway year one is for him. But you now have the affirmation from both Anthony Weaver and Austin Clark that Kenneth Grant and Jordan Phillips, they see those guys as guys that have a lot of interchangeability to play in a lot of different spots. And you kind of saw that some with Benito Jones. You saw that some with Deshaun Hand. You see a ton of that with Zach Sealer because of the football player that Zach Sealer is. I think that's the right frame of mind to have for those guys. And how they declare themselves, if there's an individual position coach on this staff that I think I have that kind of faith in to help maximize those players and do the thing that Anthony Weaver said he believes is going to happen for them faster than average, which is click into place because the players are doing the work. Austin Clark's got a great resume of developing talent and getting guys to play above what your perceived perception was, or taking young guys and molding them into being successful players. And Austin Clark got really specific with talking about how to unlock and recruit their power with consistency and the body mechanics of it. It was really great little snippet that kind of gave you some insight into like the position coach, Austin Clark, who gets into like the meat and potatoes of how they want their position to work. So it was a great kind of peek behind the curtain. Now, they also asked about Jalen Ramsey, and Anthony Weaver kind of talked about, the group that they have, a lot of guys that are operating with a lot of hunger. They heap some praise in the direction of Kader Kohou as the guy who's played and kind of been here. And that is a player who I'm really interested to see, not just because the Dolphins need corner emergence, but Kader's an undrafted free agent going into year 4, and this will be the first time he's had the same defensive scheme, and you thought you saw it click into place in the back half of last year. And the Dolphins have a financial decision to make long-term with Kader Kohou, and do they marry that decision? Like, it's a fascinating subplot amongst a endless supply of subplots at this time of year. But Kader has a very unique individual opportunity to kind of step up and be the man in the cornerback room. And what does he do with that opportunity? Is it yet another one of those ones where you got burned on some contracts that you did and then redid and gave more money to players and more guaranteed money. And you want to give your money to the right, not just the right player, but the right person. And that's kind of for Kader Kohou, what I'll be watching for him. Now, we also heard from the offensive staff. We're going to get into that a little bit next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post Your Job is LinkedIn's new feature that helps you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. You can add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder 72% of small businesses report getting qualified candidates and finding them in short order. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. The big quote for me, and Frank Smith was talked about getting more from the tight end room. And it's tough because, that's a group that Pharaoh Brown's your big ad there. And it's not like you had a marquee investment. We're coming off talking about the defensive line group where you had it was a third of your draft picks are going to the defensive tackle group. They put their money where their mouth is. They said all in the build-up, we love this interior defensive line class. Really excited about it. The tight end room, you got Pharaoh Brown, and that's the marquee addition right now. And you got a young player in Julian Hill who led the NFL in tight end penalties, which is something that Jon Embree called out. You got Jonnu Smith, who's pretty well established in what he is as a player. Embree talked a little bit about him, but I want to start with this question from Frank Smith, which is what more can you get from the tight end room? And here's what Frank Smith had to say. I just think for them, they're a group of guys that are extremely hard workers. They do exactly what we're asking them to do. And I think ultimately when we add a guy like Pharaoh, who's in his second year, was in Oakland when I was there, to see what he's done in his career and how he's maximized and made him name for himself with his blocking. We have big guys, catch radius, who really complement our skill players. I think we have a group of guys that's going to be on the details and maximize the things we're asking them to do. For a guy like Julian, this quote popped to me because I thought there were some times with Julian Hill last year that the pre-snap block assignment, it appeared on film through my diagnosis of what was transpiring on any given play, that the pre-snap look dictated you're supposed to work to this guy and you're supposed to take this angle and you're supposed to pick up this block and execute this block. And to be fair to Julian, he's a second-year player. He played a lot of snaps. He supplanted Durham Smythe, and rightfully so. I thought he was a far better option than Durham Smythe, even with his frustrations and limitations and the lack of discipline in the first half of the season. He's a better player than Durham Smythe. But there's an instinctual element that comes with, if you're running split flow and you're maybe supposed to work to the nickel, but the nickel falls out or they invert the rotation and somebody's coming from a different angle and they're declaring themselves at the line of scrimmage. It's happened in the Jets game. Like we ran right by guys, right? So that's what stood out and popped to me about that quote in particular with Julian Hill, was it felt like is a very literal interpretation of the assignment on any given play. And I'm not suggesting that Frank Smith was being passive aggressive with Julian Hill or anything like that. But it's like, if we tell them to do this, they're gonna do this, right? So for a guy like Pharaoh coming in, I still have pretty high expectations for Pharaoh Brown. And I know there's not a lot of guaranteed money there. So there's a juggling of the benefits of potentially trying to continue to develop a Julian Hill and getting him more consistent in the execution, and the speed of the game continue to slow down as a guy who came from Campbell University and was in year 2 and had this big elevated role and trying to execute your assignment. But then there's a different picture post snap, and how do you interpret it? It's a big X factor, frankly, because you look at the interior offensive line play and how they adjusted it. And you look at bringing in Nick Westbrook-Akine and how they add in another player to maybe be a little bit less 12 and 21 reliant and get some more run game appeal going with your 11 personnel. They were dead last in the league last year in run attempts out of 11 personnel. It was less than 90 rush attempts on the season. They just didn't run the ball out of 11. And it's because when you run the ball out of 11, right, more often than not only do the wide receivers have a bigger impact in it because of they have to block within the core, which Nick Westbrook-Ikine should in theory help for, but also the structure of a lot of your formations, it's spread out, and it de facto puts more pressure on your core five to win their individual matchups in overwhelming fashion, which the Dolphins did not have two guys throughout the course of the entire year who played side by side next to each other because your two big pitfalls were both the guards. Like, you didn't have guys playing next to each other that you felt were going to win their reps on a down by down basis the entire year, because you had a sturdy player with Teron Armstead, or promising young player in Patrick Paul, and then a pitfall player. And then you had Aaron Brewer, who in isolation was really a delight to watch on film last year. But then the guy on the other side of him was a pitfall player as well. And then you had the right tackle, who Austin Jackson for the first half of the season, and then it was Kendall Lamb, unless it was Jackson Carman against Houston. And we all know how that story ended. So I'll be curious to know and see, are you going to continue to be overwhelmingly the most 21 personnel-oriented team in the league? Do you trust your core five a little bit more? Does that get you into some more 11 personnel and running the ball out of 11 personnel a little bit more? The tight ends there were more 21 than they were 12. They're averaging almost 400 snaps a season out of 21 personnel versus it's kind of their marquee position group. And I just did a story for this over on A to Z, but they were the league's best 21 personnel team in 2023. They were amongst the top over the last 20 years. Few teams have scored as many points out of 21 personnel as the Dolphins did in 2023. They were comfortably the league's best EPA per play team out of 21 personnel in 2023. They were amongst the worst teams in the last 20 years playing 21 personnel in 2024. Some of that's the offensive line. Some of that's the tight end room and the receivers who are blocking, and they're smaller players. So the X factor out of that group, I think you can look at Pharaoh Brown versus Julian Hill as a really essential position battle to watch in my mind. But then also the Jonnu Smith piece of it. And that's where Jon Embree talked pretty candidly, and I love the fact that he's pushing Jonnu. He's saying, I had Jonnu he left about 185 yards on the field last year. Can we just get every yard that's available to us as far as maybe making the wrong decision with where to cut or whether to cut or how to play off a block on the perimeter or not turning upfield or turning upfield at the wrong time or doubling back against your momentum instead of carrying momentum on a run through, like all those different things. But Embree came straight out and said, as great of a year as Jonnu Smith had, and I don't think you measure his encore season explicitly by numbers, I had him almost 200 yards left on the field last year. Just get all the yards that you have. That's a great first start. But he also talked about Jonnu being a little bit more reliable as an impact on the run game. And for as good as Jonnu Smith was, I had him graded as a below expectation blocker last season, both on perimeter stuff and in the run game. It's not a strength of his game, and that's okay if your other tight end spot has stability and reliability and executes at a better level. And they didn't really have that last year. So Embree and Frank Smith talking about the tight end room in particular was something that popped quite a bit to me in my diagnosis of all of their availabilities and the questions that they answered. Which brings us to special teams. We did defense, we did offense. It's time for a little special teams talk here. Craig Aukerman talking a little bit about bringing in Ryan Stonehouse and Joe Cardona, long snapper, and talked about some return type elements and everybody getting a fresh start. We're getting into all that here next on Locked On Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. New defensive coordinator or special teams coordinator, Craig Aukerman, talked about first and foremost whatever happened last year, you watch it, you process it. Everybody's getting a fresh start on this side of the ball, which I think a fresh start's necessary. And some of the marquee players that were either did or did not deliver in their individual roles as kind of marquee special teams players for the Dolphins, there's been some turnover with that group. And I think you reached the point where it was necessary to just kind of reassess and try something different as it pertained to your approach to special teams. I'm pulling up the snap counts now because I want to know, like, obviously you had Saran Neal who left in free agency. The Dolphins did not renew his contract. Saran Neal played tied for the first amount of special team snaps of any player on the football team. 372 snaps on special teams for Saran Neal. Gone. Duke Riley played 371 snaps on special teams. He was third on the roster in special team snaps. Gone. Both of those guys out of here. So you have already over 700 snaps on special teams. And then you have names like Durham Smythe played 134. And Chop Robinson played 115. And one thing I can tell you is you're probably not going to see a whole lot of Chop Robinson on special teams this year. Elijah Campbell, but he played 290. He was fourth on the team in special team snaps. But he's in a competition for potentially a starting spot at safety. And if not a starting spot, he's in a competition with young guys like Patrick McMorris and Dante Trader, who are going to take his job. And, you saw the team bring in a whole bunch of linebackers as far as Duke Riley, who still hasn't signed anywhere. But the team went out and got KJ Britt and Willie Gay and brought back Tyrell Dodson, and Channing Tindall's still here. And Tindall was inside the top 8 on special team snaps on the team last year. And nobody drafts a guy in the late third round to just be a special teams guy. But Joe Barry made that concession yesterday. He said, this is the first time in Channing Tindall's career he's had the same system. If it's ever going to happen for you, it's going to happen right now. I don't think it's going to happen. But, that will ultimately be up to Channing Tindall. Maybe that's the edge that he needs. But if it doesn't happen, I would not dismiss the idea that Channing Tindall's not on the roster going into year 4, which would mean you could be looking at Saran Neal, Duke Riley, Elijah Campbell, I think, fighting for either a starting spot or guys gunning for his reps on special teams. Channing Tindall. I mean, those are all. Durham Smythe was in the top 12. Chop Robinson was in the top 2, 4. Kyle does math live on the show. 6, 8, 10. He was 12th. Jake Bailey's in a punting competition. He was 11th on the team in special team snaps. This whole unit, Deshaun Hand played over 100 special team snaps. Gone. Manuel Ogba, 93. Gone. Anthony Walker, 90. Gone. Tanner Connor, 110. Am I going to sit here and hold my breath? Anything's going to happen where Tanner Connor's going to make the team this year? Probably not. You have the chance to turn this whole thing on its head. And that's good. So, while I think Craig Aukerman's point of whoever's 24 was 24, everybody gets a blank slate, I think it's appropriate terminology. I also think in the grand scheme of things, the guys who are taking these snaps are going to look dramatically different than the guys who did last year, which is good. You needed to do this with this unit because it gave you effectively nothing for 3 seasons under Mike McDaniel. Your special teams was the best you could hope for was break even. Serious question. You had the Malik Washington kick return, and Malik Washington said in an interview in early April he had with it was a YouTuber I'm not super familiar with. I'll see if I can go find it. But he said they were expecting something a little different on that kickoff against the Jets. The home game against the Jets where Malik, they tied the game in the final minute and went to overtime, and then Jonnu caught the game-winning touchdown pass. Malik kind of had to just make something shake there and make something happen with the ball in his hands on that kickoff return. Is it fair to say that's the most meaningful net positive special teams play the Dolphins have had since they blocked a punt against the Bears that got returned for a touchdown in 2022? That wasn't a Jason Sanders field goal that won a game for you, or was a bomb down the middle of the uprights from 50 plus out? So Aukerman was pretty dismissive of bringing in Ryan Stonehouse. He kind of deferred to McDaniel and Greer running the roster, and he'll give his input if they ask for him. But he did not shy away from getting really excited about adding Joe Cardona. He said, I think I sprinted down to Chris's office and said, this guy's done it for 10 years, the National Football League at a high level. Was excited for the opportunity to have that chance to get him. And then when he signed, it was really big for us as an organization to bring a guy with that kind of experience. Was pretty non-committal on the punter competition between Jake Bailey and Ryan Stonehouse. And I think the Stonehouse contract kind of dictates that this is probably going to be a little bit more open for that competition than maybe what I was hoping for. Is I'm ready for Ryan Stonehouse to be the punter. Aukerman said, my main thing is I'm all about competition. Bailey is an all-pro punter. Stonehouse is an all-pro punter. When the opportunity arose that Ryan was free, let's bring him down here. Nothing is guaranteed to anybody. It's all about competition. Makes guys step up their game, and I think this is going to be going for both of them, coming in here and competing against one another. Two really good punters. I think it's only going to help those guys out. The other thing that really popped, he was asked about the return game. And the question, apologies to whoever asked the question at the media availability. I didn't pick up who it was. Who is next in line as the next returner? It sounds like Malik Washington, D. Eskridge, Tyreek Hill, if he wants to. Aukerman said that was one of the biggest appeals that he has. And this quote popped to me because, again, you really haven't gotten contributions from the return game, right? Like you had the Malik Washington kickoff return against the Jets, but they kind of strategized a certain approach to how they kicked that ball, and it blew up in their face. But for the guys that are talented, like Malik Washington and D. Eskridge and Tyreek Hill, you kind of saw some smatterings of all those guys getting opportunities. But I do agree with Aukerman that it should be a really attractive group of skill guys. Aukerman said, they have a bunch of skill guys that are very skilled football players that can go back and return punts and kickoffs. One of the big things that we're going to be harping on is, guys, let's make sure we're catching the ball. We're going to give back to our offense, but we need to make some plays. And it's our job on special teams to go make plays that help our team win football games. I'm excited to see what this change brings for the Dolphins from a special team standpoint, just because there's so much meat on the bone here. And like you're playing kickoffs and kickoff returns, and I'm just sitting here saying, just please kick it out back at the end. So just take the touchback. Like I don't trust good things to happen. And a chance to reinvigorate this side of the ball, I think is sorely needed. And hearing from Aukerman for the first time and some of his insights, sounds like we're going to get like a legitimate punter situation. The return stuff is going to be a big point of emphasis. And realistically, just from their personnel decisions, that this group's and unit's going to look dramatically different, which is a good thing because it needed to. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm Kyle Krabs. I am out of here. Be back to talk to you all again tomorrow. And in the meantime, go Fins.